RCPCH Podcasts.
Welcome to this Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health podcast on the college's new 3-year strategy. I'm Jo Revill, Chief Executive of the college, and very pleased to say that today I'm going to be joined to discuss the strategy and what it means by Camilla Kingdon, the college president. So Camilla, could we start by talking about why the college needs a strategy and who's it going to be for?
Hi, Jo. Yes, I think that's a really good place to start. You know, I think people often think of strategies as sort of rather dry, dull documents that sit on a shelf somewhere and maybe we occasionally have a look at it. But I think the value of a strategy is that it's a fairly high-level document that helps us understand what our priorities are as a college and essentially sort of sets out a track for the next, in this case, 3 years. And the reason why it's so useful is that it is helpful for those of us that work within the college because it reminds us about what our kind of priorities are. But even more importantly, it's really useful for people who belong to the college or want to understand what the college's roles and responsibilities are, and indeed for our members, what they can expect from the college. And I think sometimes people are a bit confused about what the Royal Colleges do and what they don't do. And so I really see this as a great opportunity for us to spend a little bit of time really refining what we think we actually really do and what our priorities are for the next few years, and then to lay it out so that people can engage with it and understand what our work is all about and in fact how they can join us and get involved. So I think the strategy is a really important priority for us to kind of lay out our roadmap for the next 3 years. I think that is probably how I would summarise it. Is that how you would see it, do you think? Or do you think the level of detail within a strategy might sort of tie us down too tightly, do you think?
I don't think so, no. I mean, we've talked a lot about that, haven't we? Having something that really sets out the ambitions of the organisation over the next 3 years. Having a document that's going to help us, I think, deal with what might be great areas of uncertainty for children and young people in this period and for our members as well. And I think many people listening today will, some people will be tired of hearing organisations talk about strategies as kind of high-level documents that are full of jargon. And we've made huge efforts to make sure that's not the case and it's really meaningful. I think the detail really lives with the operational plans that we have for the college each year, which sets out what we're going to do and how we spend our money and what business as usual is and what the new areas are. But I think this strategic document is really setting, if you like, guide rails for where we see the college going over this next period.
I think that's right. And I think the process that we went through to develop the strategy, for me, has given me a lot of confidence that we've got the guide rails right, but they are only guide rails. And so, it might be that over time we want to sort of tweak some of the detail around what we're planning to do, but that the broad priorities and kind of exoskeleton of the strategy will stay in place, and I quite like that idea because it feels to me like it's been a really great process of engagement, with everyone from our board of trustees to our subspecialty groups to council, and so on. I think it's been a really rich opportunity to actually go out and say, what do you think the priorities should be for the next 3 years? What should we carry on doing? What should we stop doing? Do we need to get the kind of level of priority right or change? For me, I endlessly worry about our workforce, for instance. But actually, does that chime with everybody's priority or not? And so I think it's been a really useful, it's been more than 6 months, hasn't it, that we've kind of gone out and purposefully sought feedback about this.
I think that's right. It feels to me like we've had a huge number of conversations already to get to this point. And I think we looked at the principles that should guide it and how we made sure that we listened to so many people who are involved in the production of the strategy, including, of course, children and young people through our And Us group. And I think that was a really important point for us, that we got their views as well. And when the strategy is published, people will see that reflected. But we tried to meet a set of principles, didn't we, when we started off in this process, that we wanted to make sure that it was a compelling document, that it was something that would be memorable, but also had quite a clear evidence base to it as well, that it wasn't just putting your finger up in the air and sort of checking where trends lay, but it was something that we could keep referring back to, I think. Did you see it in that way?
Yes, I did, and I think for many people, when we launch our strategy and people have an opportunity to really kind of go through it and interrogate it, I don't think there'll be a huge number of surprises, because the kind of broad headlines are, I think, essentially what we believe we are here to do as firstly as a charity, and secondly, obviously, clearly as a Medical Royal College, which is our dual role around the workforce. And then there's our equally important role, which is around child health and child health advocacy. And so I think people will recognise those themes, because they very, very much are the kind of main structure of the future strategy. But I think what's been really nice is that within those kind of broad headlines, we've been able to think very hard about, for instance, the fact that digital transformation now is such a key part of both the present but also our future, not just for the clinicians working in child health, but also for our children and young people, and the advocacy we need to do on their behalf. And so we were able to bring that theme out in a kind of much more specific kind of way than perhaps has previously been there, because of times are changing and our role and the kind of nature of our work is evolving. And so I think that's where it encourages me that this is a living, evolving document that reflects the changes in the ways in which we're working, and both as clinicians, but also in terms of the kind of advocacy work that we're doing on behalf of children and young people.
So perhaps I should mention what these themes
Yes.
are actually, Camilla, so that people have an idea. So all of our activity really fitted under these 4 themes, I think. The first was around the improvement of quality and care that's given to children and young people. The second is around building skills and knowledge within paediatrics and child health. There was then a major theme around advocacy and influencing others, all the people who shape our world. And we've done so much work on this advocacy piece, haven't we, this year, with everything from free school meals and the support for Marcus Rashford and what he did, to the work that you do as president with others, influencing governments and other key bodies in making the case for children. And then fourthly, around developing our community. And I wondered if you wanted to say anything about what that community piece means for you, because I think it's very much your stamp that you've put on this strategy.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. This is a kind of bit of the strategy that's really close to my heart, because so many members have talked about the importance of communities. And we hear this when we talk to our regional leads and area officers. There's a real desire amongst the paediatric workforce to engage with each other, both within their regions or within their subspecialty areas, or within different sort of communities of practice, essentially. And the great advantage of that is about sort of sharing solutions to problems, putting heads together to try and devise some creative ways of navigating through difficult areas. And it certainly comes out in our lifelong careers work as well. So I am absolutely confident we're going to be achieving a huge amount in this particular domain in the next few years. That really makes me very excited.
I think the advocacy work came through for me as a really, really strong theme of the strategy. And we had a lot of discussions, didn't we, about the challenges we face as we come through and then out of the pandemic, but also a lot of the opportunities we've got looking ahead. And we do strategies in 3-year chunks. So the last strategy is just coming to an end. And then this is the next 3-year chunk, beginning in this autumn and going forward for 3 years and tying in with your presidency. But I think it was clear at the beginning, wasn't it, that Council were thinking really hard, did we need major changes for the direction of college activity? Because that was obviously one of the questions. When you write a new strategy, are you going to radically shift direction and do something entirely different? But really there was that agreement, wasn't there, that a lot of this was about improvement in many areas.
Yes. I think that's absolutely right. So that actually an awful lot of the strategy is kind of business as usual, isn't it? So it's around, delivering our exams and our assessments and supporting the professional development of our paediatric and broader child health workforce. But then also accepting that, there's a lot of stuff that's changing around us and our new and emerging priorities for our paediatric workforce and for young people. And the obvious example there, I would say, is around sustainability and the environment and climate change. And, with the best will in the world, that probably wasn't an obvious strategic imperative 3 or 4 years ago when we set up the last strategy in the way that it is now. We've got COP26 happening very soon this year. And this is an issue that we know is really front of mind across the child health workforce and of course children and young people. And so what was really lovely is that this strategy just gives us the opportunity to just bring that out as a bit more of an imperative within the strategy, and that's the bit that I really like about this, and I hope our members will recognise as they read it that we've been able to reflect some of the really important new and emerging trends within child health.
I think it was Liz Marder, our treasurer, who said, well, maybe this is our moment, in paediatrics. Maybe this is the point at which we can really develop across the 4 nations of the UK and abroad the plans that we need for children and young people. And I do hope that the strategy becomes a way of doing that with all the operational plans and the business plans that sit below it, of course, because I think that's so important. But I'm very pleased that the role of digital innovation is kind of threaded through the strategy, because I think that's just so important. And I mean, goodness knows, in this period in the last year, we've had to go digital across so many areas of healthcare, but within the college itself and the 170 staff, we've switched almost overnight in some cases to running our activities remotely. And it's about holding on, isn't it, to some of those areas of innovation, keeping hold of the best. And I think being aware that many of our members are doing innovative work every day and thinking about what the role of the college is in supporting that as well. I think that came through quite strongly, didn't it, as a theme?
Yes, it did, didn't it? I suppose the question that I have in the back of my mind is, when the strategy was written 3 or 4 years ago, none of the people, and in fact I remember being there on the day when we did a lot of brainstorming around it, but none of us anticipated the pandemic. So let's hope we don't have another massive sort of national crisis like COVID's been in the next 3 years. But let's say there was some really dramatic change of direction. Are you confident that we would, with using the strategy, that we would be able to respond to that, do you think?
I think we can. I'm confident that we can, because I think the way it's been written enables us to have the agility and the flexibility to respond to all the unknown things that might come our way, but also to be able to run the business as usual, because behind it all, I would say this as chief exec, wouldn't I? But it has to be financially sustainable, and it has to be work that the staff at the college can undertake and perform. And more than that, we're a college with more than 20,000 members now, and more than 2,500 really active volunteer members who perform a huge host of activities. So I think the strategy is written in such a way that we can continue business, we can restore the areas of work that we need to, and that we can adapt. It's high level enough that we can do that with the right plans written underneath about it. And partly it's a question of our growth, I think, as an organisation. I don't just mean growth in members or growth in money, but I mean our growth in advocacy work and our growth in influence, actually. which is something that we've always talked about so much, haven't we, in the college over, I know, decades.
Yes, that's right. And I think something that I noticed while we were doing the strategy, and as we sort of moved around the different groups, sharing the strategy and developing it, was that when we posed the question to the various groups we were engaging with about what should we as a college stop doing or do less of, that's when we struggled the most, didn't we? I think we as a college are incredibly good at embracing new ideas, getting involved in important new kind of areas of engagement and advocacy. But the risk with that, of course, is that we end up doing a lot of things perhaps not as well as we might be able to. And so I think the importance of this strategy also is that it just hopefully will allow us to just keep in check, so that instead of, I'm guilty of this all the time, is that someone comes up with an idea and you go, yes, brilliant, let's get the college involved in that. And of course, we want to be responsive and we want to encourage new ideas and developments, but we've got to be really careful that we continue to deliver really high quality work. And I think that's where hopefully this strategy is going to help us stay within, as you rightly call it, the guide rails, so that we aren't overstretching ourselves and ending up doing perhaps some less brilliant work than perhaps we would ideally want to do.
Yeah. And that's the risk, isn't it? That you can end up with a body where activities are diluted because you're trying to do too much and you're overstretched. But I think the strategy can become a really good way of prioritising and deprioritising as you need to over the next 3 years. I also think demonstrating the impact of what we achieve is really important, and making sure that this document can be understandable by anyone, actually, that members and young people and children could read it and they could really understand what it is that the college does across so many areas. And I think, we've committed to reviewing the strategy every year and making sure that we can demonstrate impact, and if necessary, adding or subtracting, if there's areas that need to change within that period, because I think it does represent a lot of investment in both new activities of work, as you said, around equality, diversity and inclusion. And I can only see the work on climate change growing and growing. Mm. And I think you see it the same way, don't you?
Mm. Absolutely. But I think, sometimes college members will say to me, particularly college members who are beyond CCT and working as either SAS doctors or consultants, I'm not clear what the college does for me. And I understand where that question comes from, because I think when you're a trainee, it's very, very clear what the role of the college is. But I think historically, perhaps people have been less clear, as they've got later on into their careers. And what I'm really hoping for this strategy is that, and particularly with the rollout of the strategy and the kind of work that we're planning around engaging with members about the strategy, that people will become much clearer in their minds about what the roles are that we undertake. And I love your idea of us being able to then sort of measure impact, because it would be so nice, wouldn't it, to be able to go back to members and said, you asked us to, for instance, engage on the climate change sustainability agenda. Here's what we've done in the last year in terms of activity and impact. And I think that would just be the most brilliant, strong message that would really reinforce in people's minds actually what the college does. So I think I see that as a real strength.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really important as well that we make sure that the strategy is a document that actually comes to life for members. And what Council always said at the beginning is you just don't want a document that sits on a shelf for 3 years and then people get it off at the end and say, well, what have you done? It's got to be a lot more than that. So I hope that when we publish this strategy in September, that we have we get a sort of constant dialogue with members and others about the strategy and what's in there and what it might mean to them and what they take away from it as well. And so it's quite important, I think, that we're working on lots of different formats of the document. So a kind of animated video and then a shorter at-a-glance version, which I think will be good for people, and that we make sure our and us group are constantly plugged into it and manage to give their feedback all the way through as well. So bringing it to life matters, doesn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I know the college team have got some great plans around some webinars, and of course the Milestones team are really excited about doing some work there as well. So I feel very optimistic that we'll be able to reach as many of our members as possible, so that actually they're aware of this, can hopefully engage with it, can also remind us of what we've set out to do, and challenge us if they feel perhaps we're not delivering it as robustly as we've promised to. Because for me, as president, what I want this to be is around getting members far more engaged with the college. And I see this strategy as a real opportunity to help members understand, A, what we do, but B, how they can get stuck in and contribute. Because we've got this hugely talented membership of, as you've said, over 20,000 members. And I'd just love to see more people getting involved and sort of getting, lending their strengths and talents to our work.
I think that's when it really comes alive and is really going to start to live. And I'm really excited that we're going to have webinars specifically looking at the 4 themes that you're going to see coming out in the strategy. Well, I hope we can enthuse everyone who's listened to this today to pick up the strategy when it comes out and listen to the webinars and find out more detail. But thank you so much for your time, Camilla, on this.
It's a great pleasure.
So thank you everyone for listening to this RCPCH podcast, and a reminder to please check our web pages at rcpch.ac.uk to keep up to date with the latest information about the strategy and other college work.
RCPCH Podcasts.